Part 30. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 291. This power. Beside Mu Qiu, Lu Qianqian stared at the demon mask in Mu Qiu's hand with her beautiful eyes, her breath stagnant. Even she couldn't help but tremble at the terrifying evil spirit emanating from it. The hollow pupils were deep and strange, as if the soul would be absorbed into it in the next second. Sweeping the ghost mask that was quite similar to the Shura mask, Lu Qianqian didn't dare to look at it for a moment. It seemed that there was really some evil ghost soul that devoured people's souls imprisoned in it. It was different from the Shura mask with red eyes and fangs before. The fear brought by the Shura mask came entirely from its wearer. The eternal night Shura who overpowered Yuhai and made countless people in Yuhai despair from the bottom of their hearts. And the ghost mask in front of him was like a hellish evil ghost. Just a glance at it sent a trembling feeling to the soul, and the oppression seemed to reach the soul directly, captivating the soul. Mu Qiu stroked the surface of the mask with a smile. The smooth texture came from the palm of his hand, and there was a faint black air wrapped around the mask. This is the Shura mask after being nurtured in the box of ghosts. After being sacrificed by the blood and souls of countless dead souls in the box, not only did its appearance change greatly. With the ability of Mu Qiu's soul fruit, it also transformed its own soul. This soul after being endowed is filled with the evil spirit contained in the box. This is a natural evil soul weapon. Although this additional ability is not obvious, even to Mu Qiu, it is better than nothing. But with the advancement of the box of ghosts, the ability of the objects nurtured in it will become more and more powerful. In front of him was the box of ghosts emitting a purple glow, and he held the ghost mask in his hand. Mu Qiu was thinking secretly. What would be obtained if humans were nurtured in the box of ghosts? The cold wind of winter swept across the top of the building, and was immediately dispersed by the flames of the explosion as it rushed to the distant battlefield. In the battle between the rebels and the Zilan troops, there was no sense of coldness at all. Artillery fire flew, lasers shot everywhere, and tall robots exploded one after another, with fire and smoke filling the entire battlefield. Observing the battle, the rebels were well prepared and caught the Zilan troops off guard in a moment. The outer defense network composed of patrol robots was quickly broken by the raiding rebel organization. The steel fence surrounding the biochemical factory was blasted with large holes by artillery. Go save others first. With a loud shout, countless rebels in different clothes rushed into the territory of the biochemical factory. Immediately afterwards, more combat robots and mechas controlled by combat troops rushed over. Luo Ziyuan held a thundering long sword, and blue arcs flashed frequently in the air. All the robots fell and paralyzed wherever they passed, turning into a pile of scrap metal. In an instant, there were constant fiery explosions all around, and smoke rose up. However, at this moment, a mecha driven by humans beside him suddenly broke through the dense fog and crashed into Luo Ziyuan's direction. The head of the mecha was sharp, and a pair of mechanical arms were inlaid with sharp blades. The huge blade was glowing with a strange purple, and behind it was a slender mechanical tail. The 8 Knights of Fenglan Kama Idaki. Looking at the mechanical monsters rushing in front of him, Luo Ziyuan's eyes flashed with a gleam of brilliance under the clown mask. Luo Ziyuan's body stagnated, his lower body took root, and he suddenly raised the thundering lightsaber in his hand and swung it out in the air. In an instant, the lightning blade that was almost condensed into substance collided with the mechanical double blades. The thundering lightsaber crackled in the air, and the arcs on the sword body flowed, containing amazing destructive power. Luo Ziyuan destroyed a large number of mechas with this lightsaber made of lightning. But strangely, the purple mecha seemed to be made of some special metal as well. The strange mecha was not afraid of the lightning lightsaber in Luo Ziyuan's hand at all. The mechanical double blades flashing with purple light fought with the lightning lightsaber in the air for more than 10 rounds in a short moment. The driver of the sickle weasel mecha obviously recognized the owner of the thundering lightsaber and laughed sharply. Thundering sword? It turned out to be you, the traitor. From the sound of the sickle weasel, it seemed that he was quite familiar with Luo Ziyuan. When Luo Ziyuan heard the slightly sarcastic voice from the mecha, his pupils trembled slightly, and his confrontational figure suddenly stagnated. However, it was this moment of stagnation that the sickle weasel mecha in front of him found an opportunity. The huge force came from the mechanical arms, Luo Ziyuan's tiger's mouth shook, and his figure retreated immediately. Even the flashing arc on the thundering sword fluctuated more and more. What's wrong? Is it because you have lived too comfortably since joining the rebels that you don't know how to hold a sword anymore? In the cockpit of the sickle weasel mecha sat a young man, thin, with standing hair and a wild face. Under the funny clown mask, was Luo Ziyuan's gloomy face. With his palms clenched, the arcs flashing on the thunder sword suddenly increased. A powerful energy wave burst out from Luo Ziyuan's body, and it was added to the thunder sword in his hand. Gravity blessing. The next second, Luo Ziyuan's figure flashed and disappeared in an instant. The sickle weasel's face suddenly became alert, but an arc of electricity flashed across the control screen in front of him. In an instant, a figure had already killed in front of the sickle weasel with lightning. The long sword filled with lightning suddenly became extremely heavy after being blessed with gravity. It chopped down from the sky, like a mountain pressing down on one's head. Such a close-range attack, even a fast Kama Itaki mecha could not dodge it. In an instant, the lightning blade with 1,000-pound force hit the Kama Itaki mecha. The arcs shot out, and the ground under the feet was crushed by the weight of Mount Tai. It seemed that the Kama Itaki mecha was about to be unable to withstand the double pressure of lightning and weight. At this moment, a swift and heavy sound of breaking through the air suddenly came from the side. I saw a huge iron ball covering the sky flying from a distance. The iron ball was full of wolf-tooth-like spikes, and the other end was pulled by a thick iron chain. The iron ball covered with steel spikes fell like a meteorite, and it smashed straight towards Luo Ziyuan's figure. Luo Ziyuan shook his body and pulled out the thunder sword suddenly. He retreated violently, narrowly avoiding the fatal blow. Luo Ziyuan was startled and looked at the factory gate not far away. The fog caused by the explosion in front of the gate faded, revealing a tall bald figure. The bald man had dark skin, and blue veins could be clearly seen under his knotted muscles. Under the man's feet, a large number of rebels were lying down. What was even more terrifying was that the man was holding an extremely thick iron chain in his hand. At the end of the iron chain was the round iron ball covered with spikes. Then, the bald man looked at Luo Ziyuan wearing a clown mask and sneered. "Long time no see. Lei Hu, the former captain of the 3rd Combat Unit, one of the 8 Knights of Fenglan. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord." Author, Mo. Chapter 292. Hearing the bald man's mocking tone, Luo Ziyuan calmly took off the clown mask, revealing his mediocre appearance under the mask. At this point, he no longer needs to hide his face. "I haven't used that title for a long time." Luo Ziyuan calmly looked at the bald man with a calm expression. That's right, Luo Ziyuan was once the captain of the Fenglan Combat Unit, one of the 8 Fenglan Knights codenamed Thunder Tiger. Today's Zilan base has completely changed, we have to get it back on track. The dark-skinned bald man's face was bulging with veins, and he sneered. "You are so shameless to be able to talk about betrayal so high-sounding." As he said that, the bald man pulled the iron chain in his hand, and the huge iron ball tied at the end of the chain was also thrown high. In an instant, the huge iron ball stirred up a large piece of cirrus cloud. The howling of the wind also attracted the attention of countless rebels around. "Is it Barbarian Bear? The captain of the 4th Combat Unit of Zilan, why is he here too?" Many rebels were horrified when they saw the bald man. This dark-skinned bald man was also one of the 8 knights of Fenglin. The intelligence did not tell them that they would encounter 2 Fenglin knights in this operation. Instantly, the hearts of countless rebel soldiers sank. They had already felt that the situation seemed to be developing in an unknown direction. Barbarian Bear swung the iron chain in his hand violently, and the huge iron ball connected at the end also rolled up a whistling wind in an instant, bombarding Luo Ziyuan. Anything that blocked the path, whether it was a rebel soldier or a combat robot, was instantly swept and killed by the iron ball. The huge iron ball like a meteorite bombarded, and Luo Ziyuan knew that he could not fight hard, so he had to retreat. But in the next moment, a violent energy came from the thick iron chain at the end of the iron ball. With a series of clicks, the countless spikes on the iron ball suddenly shot out. The ends of the spikes were bound by a dark green dotted line. This strange iron ball wrapped in iron chains was also a modified box weapon. Luo Ziyuan had just dodged the brute force of the iron ball. The sound of the earth collapsing after being pierced by the iron ball came from behind. He stood still, but a spike in his pupils quickly enlarged. There was no time to dodge. Luo Ziyuan swung the thundering lightsaber in his hand. The momentum of this conethorn was comparable to his lightsaber with gravity. Luo Ziyuan tried his best to block the impact of the conethorn, but he couldn't help but be shaken back several steps by the powerful momentum. Roar! At this moment, a beast-like roar came from behind. I saw a modified werewolf with armor all over his body running from a distance. The lone wolf's eyes were filled with rage, the steel claws in his hands were stained with blood, and the hair on his body was stained with large patches of blood. Then, the lone wolf howled, and rushed towards the bald man with sharp teeth and claws. At the critical moment, a slender mechanical tail directly slapped the lone wolf aside. The purple sickle weasel mecha came across the sky. 2 more mechanical double-edged swords broke through the air and killed, and the lone wolf's right arm ejected hot shells one after another. At the moment when the sickle weasel dodged, the lone wolf's left arm was cold and the claws on his left arm rushed forward to fight with the tall sickle weasel mecha. At the same time, the battle between Luo Ziyuan and the wild bear on the other side was also intensifying. Luo Ziyuan held the thundering lightsaber, but the spiked iron ball wielded by the wild bear was even more powerful. In addition, the energy spikes on it seemed to have life, and the attacks from all directions were simply hard to defend against. For a while, Luo Ziyuan couldn't get close to the wild bear at all. Seeing this, the surrounding rebel soldiers immediately wanted to help. But they were surprised to find that the number of combat robots and mechas of the Zilan combat force around them was increasing. They were actually surrounded by these mechas that suddenly emerged. What on earth is going on? In the biochemical factory, the rebels had just rescued a group of survivors trapped in a truck. Suddenly, a survivor's eyes flashed with a fierce light, and a dagger was pulled out of his hand. The sharp dagger instantly cut the neck of a rebel. In the latter's horrified eyes, several more rebel companions fell to the ground with blood. Next, more and more ragged survivors rushed out of the carriage, holding guns and launching a fatal attack on these unprepared rebels. Mysterious figures in black robes appeared in the air. As soon as these black-robed men appeared, they took out weapon boxes in their hands, and the weapons in the boxes appeared in the flashing light. Damn it, this is a trap. At this moment, even the dumbest people found that tonight's action was actually a trap for their resistance army. More and more robot armies surrounded the biochemical factory standing at the junction of the central area and the civilian area. And the resistance army was also trapped in a desperate situation with both internal and external worries. As the number of mechas around him increased frequently, the bad news of the team's destruction kept coming from the intercom beside his ear. Luo Ziyuan, who was fighting fiercely with the wild bear, felt something was wrong and hurriedly said, "The situation has changed, everyone retreat." However, as soon as he finished speaking, a large piece of feathers wrapped in ice shot out like a rain of arrows. "Ah, Why did you leave without saying hello, Lehu? Feeling the sound coming from the sky, Luo Ziyuan dodged the attack and looked up suddenly. But he saw a figure with wings on his back standing in the air. It turned out to be another Fenglan knight. In an instant, the situation turned around, and the rebels had no way to retreat and were completely in a desperate situation. On the top of the building far away from the biochemical base, Mu Qiu sat on the roof. One hand was holding a ghost mask that exuded a cold breath. The other hand was supporting his head, smiling and looking at the battlefield lit up by fire in the distance. As a human base that dared to calculate the eternal night, it still has some brains. At the same time, in a mysterious control room in the central building, the large screen showed the fierce battle scene on the biochemical factory. The scenes on the screen kept switching, and finally stopped on Luo Ziyuan's solemn face. Sir, the plan is going smoothly. Sirs Mang Xiang and Hank have led their troops to surround the target location. A man in tight combat uniform turned back to report. Just as the man finished speaking, footsteps slowly came from behind him. A man with long brown hair and a windbreaker approached with a sharp look. Staring at the screen where the rebels were surrounded, a murderous intent flashed in the man's eyes, and he said in a stern tone, "Order them to annihilate all the rebels except the faces on the wanted list, leaving no one alive." Yes. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 293. The second combat unit, Hank reports to you. A woman's playful shout came from the sky. When Luo Ziyuan heard this voice, his pupils trembled slightly, and his expression could no longer maintain its previous calmness. He suddenly looked up and saw a beautiful figure wearing crystal blue close-fitting armor. The woman's figure is slender and small, her face is pretty, her armored belly is empty, and her flat and white belly is exposed. The crystal blue armor he was wearing was filled with wisps of cold air, and a pair of translucent wings sprouted from his back. Hank. The third Fenglan knight? If he and Lone Wolf were able to deal with the barbarian bear and Kamamida before. But now there is a Hank wearing ice armor, and there are such a huge army of mechas around. Maybe this time their resistance army will be completely wiped out? Luo Ziyuan gritted his teeth, and the energy of the thundering lightsaber in his hand surged. At this moment, the bald man bear in the distance seemed to have received some message. Turning off the pager in his hand, the bear waved the thick chain that stretched several feet in his hand. He looked at Luo Ziyuan and grinned wildly. "Thunder Tiger, although I really want to continue reminiscing with you, it's a pity." Before he finished speaking, the chain in his hand had already been thrown out. Immediately afterwards, the iron ball as huge as a meteorite hit from across the sky. "Let me bury you today." At the same time, countless robot armies around them also received orders. The heads of these combat robots flash a dangerous red light. With the laser spitting in his hand, he launched a carpet-like killing attack on the resistance soldiers in the encirclement. In an instant, the rebel soldiers who had no time to prepare were attacked by indiscriminate laser shells, causing countless casualties. Ouch! A long roar came from the mouth of the lone wolf, and his eyes were filled with a murderous look. The sharp claws made of steel are cold, and the lone wolf uses all four limbs together, galloping up to launch a counter-attack against the surrounding mechas. However, at this moment, a gust of wind suddenly rose in the air, and two giant mechanical blades coated with poison came through the air and slashed. "It's Kama Itaki. Jaja, is the little wolf dog so anxious to die?" A burst of wild laughter spread from the purple mecha. But the figure of the Kama Ita mecha kept running straight towards the lone wolf to kill him. Damn! Looking at the lone wolf entangled by the sickle and weasel, the screams of resistance soldiers kept coming from all around. Luo Ziyuan frowned. The next second, an iron ball hit Luo Ziyuan with the weight of a mountain. There were also sharp spikes coming from all directions. Luo Ziyuan jumped forward and dodged the huge iron ball like a meteorite. Immediately afterwards, there was a loud thunder in his hand, and countless thorns that were shot were bounced away by the arc. Luo Ziyuan's eyes were sharp as he held the thundering sword and moved repeatedly in the air. In the blink of an eye, he was already at the side of the wild bear. The strange energy around him was rioting, and the great gravity was blessing the thunder sword. In an instant, the huge body of the wild bear was struck by thousands of lightnings and fell to the ground and was eliminated. At this moment, a cloud of cold wind floated in the air. Luo Ziyuan's body was instantly stagnated by the Arctic cold air. He was surprised to notice that his legs and feet had formed a thick layer of frost in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the sturdy bald man also reacted and let out a wild beast-like roar. Deep energy fluctuations spread, and the bald man's body grew several times in size out of thin air. Brown hair grows all over his body, and his palms are extremely thick. In an instant, this bald man actually transformed into a ferocious bear. This Fenglin Knight is an S-level mutant ability user. The bald man transformed into a giant bear, and his strength increased dramatically. Waving the iron chain in his hand has a heavy air-piercing force, and can destroy a tall building with just one blow. Hanbirds wearing armor were flying in the air, and the cold wind was biting. From time to time, he would shoot feathers made of ice, comparable to bullets, downwards. The giant bear on the earth is extremely powerful, and there is even more cold air roaring in the sky. Even someone as strong as Luo Ziyuan would have a hard time being flanked by two Fenglan Knights. After just a few rounds, Luo Ziyuan fell into a disadvantage. And many soldiers of the resistance army were defeated one after another under the siege of countless tall mechas. The encirclement circle is shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. On the other side, Lone Wolf was scratched by a giant blade while fighting MaleProtagonist. A large piece of rotten flesh instantly appeared at the wound, and purple blood continued to gush out. Although the antidote serum was injected in time, the Lone Wolf's combat power also plummeted. It was difficult to escape from MaleProtagonist's attack for a while. The fight between Luo Ziyuan and the two Fenglan Knights became increasingly difficult. In the battle command room of the terminal building 1,000 meters away. The battle scene of the biochemical factory is reflected on the large screen. The long-haired man in a trench coat looked at the situation that had turned around in an instant and sneered. "They're just a bunch of sewer rats. Uncle." During the battle, Luo Ziyuan was seen losing ground in the battle. The companions beside him fell one after another. A half-grown boy had tears streaming down his face and looked anxious. At a loss, Mao Yuming suddenly remembered something and took out a square box from his waist. Uncle said that this box weapon can only be used at the most dangerous moment. Mao Yuming solemnly took out a crystal core key and opened the box in his hand. There was a tube of golden medicine in the box. Mao Yuming swallowed his saliva, and his body instinctively had a desire for the energy contained in it. This is a strengthening medicine that suits him, which can stimulate the blood in his body to the maximum extent. The next second, Mao Yuming swallowed the medicine in the box directly. Ugh! The moment he took the medicine, blue veins appeared on Mao Yuming's forehead. He strangled his neck in pain, and his face flushed. Immediately afterwards, the boy's body began to grow larger and larger, and various parts of his body also underwent some strange changes. In just a few breaths, Mao Yuming's body grew to several feet long, several times taller than those mechas. WWW. The boy's eyes became red, and light yellow hair grew all over his body. You can vaguely see golden scales on the skin, and a thin tail grows from its back. Some unknown roar came from its throat, and its monster-like body stood up straight. Smooth scales can be faintly seen in the light yellow hair. The beast's head is like a lion, with a pair of long horns standing up, deep red eyes, and a powerful aura bursting out from its body. The body is even more huge, even those tall mechas are shorter than this humanoid monster. As soon as the 4-in-1 monster transformed by Mao Yuming appeared, it attracted the attention of everyone in the field. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 294. Is this a Kylin? On the rooftop of a distant building, Mu-Chiu sat on the edge with his legs crossed. When he saw the monster that Mao Yuming transformed into, he was quite surprised. Lion head, deer horns, tiger eyes, dragon scales, ox tail, all these features are very similar to the legendary Kylin. But the difference is that the monster that Mao Yuming transformed into stood upright, and his hands turned into thick claws and hooves. After transforming into this form, Mao Yuming's aura obviously increased several times. No. Although the appearance is very similar to the legendary Kylin, this aura is definitely not a real Kylin. Mu-Chiu closed his eyes, and he had pure Zilong blood in his body. If this Mao Yuming can really transform into a mythical beast Kylin, even if there is only a trace of aura leaking out, he will be able to sense it. And although Mao Yuming's power is powerful now, it is far from the point of causing the Zilong blood in his body to resonate. Is it a cyborg? Mu-Chiu opened his eyes and looked at the 4-in-1 monster that Mao Yuming had transformed into, thinking. Are you dreaming of creating a divine beast? At the same time, in the battle command room of the terminal brain building. Sir, there is a situation. The words of a subordinate attracted the attention of the long-haired man. Then, the screen flashed, and the monster transformed by Mao Yuming appeared on the screen. The monster's huge body rushed into the army of robots. It roared, punched, and stabbed, and the sound of mechanical explosions was heard everywhere. The monster seemed to have done everything possible, and launched a crazy suicide attack on the surrounding robots. But the monster's fur was extremely hard and thick. Tianlai novel network. Even laser shells could not penetrate its skin when they hit it. Oh. It's that failed product. The long-haired man asked back the moment he saw the monster. As if he knew the monster, there was not much surprise in his tone. Sir, do we need to take any measures? The man with long brown hair waved his hand and said indifferently. It's just a failure. Let Mang Xiang and the others deal with it. The scene turned back to the battle, and Mao Yuming's Sci-Fi monster joined the battle. The huge monster instantly attracted a part of the firepower of the combat robots. Some mechas of the combat units even launched a joint siege against the monster. The Sci-Fi monster not only has thick skin and flesh, but even artillery shells can't cause any substantial damage to it. The monster's lion-like body can also spit out large amounts of smoke, sweeping into the mechanical army like clouds and fog. The monster's figure instantly disappeared from everyone's sight. This smoke is extremely strange, and even infrared detection devices can't penetrate it. The next second, the monster's figure suddenly rushed out of the fog. After knocking down a mecha, it directly waved its giant claws to destroy it, and then disappeared into the fog again. Even this smoke is still spreading, and in the blink of an eye it enveloped the entire biochemical factory. The smoke instantly enveloped everyone's vision. The disappearance of vision caused a lot of trouble to the Zilan side, which had already had a great advantage. Is it Yuming? The moment he saw the smoke, Luo Ziyuan realized that it was Mao Yuming who opened the box he left behind. This form would also bring a certain burden to Mao Yuming, and Luo Ziyuan knew that he could not delay any longer. With thunder and lightning in his lightsaber, Luo Ziyuan rushed in one direction according to the sound of the chain pulling. In an instant, the barbarian bear was accidentally pierced through the shoulder by the long sword. Enduring the severe pain, the barbarian bear grabbed in the direction of the attack. But he found that Luo Ziyuan's figure had jumped and disappeared in the smoke. Feeling the blue arc of electricity lingering in the smoke, the barbarian bear could only passively swing the iron ball, trying to form a defense in front of him. Damn it! The wild bear had a ferocious look on his face, and he suddenly looked up. "Hankei, how long are you going to wait?" A woman's impatient shout came from the sky. "I know, why are you arguing?" As soon as the voice fell, a biting cold wind as if from the polar regions attacked. Then, countless transparent feathers fell from the sky. The moment the feathers fell, they quickly dissipated in the air, turning into cold air floating in the air. Then, the whistling cold wind gradually dissipated the large amount of smoke. Frost began to appear in the air, and the temperature around it dropped frequently. A beautiful woman wearing blue close-fitting armor flew in the air, with her hands on her waist, her flat belly exposed, and a murderous look in the corners of her eyes. That's Hankei, the captain of the 2nd Combat Unit. It is said that her mecha can be used to the extreme as an elemental awakener. It's over, 3 Fenglin Knights. Now Hankei has truly revealed his true face to everyone. Countless resistance fighters on the ground have become ashen and in despair the moment they saw Hankei. At this moment, a huge figure suddenly rushed out of the remaining smoke. When everyone looked over, they found that this figure was Mao Yuming, who had turned into a 4-in-1 monster. However, Mao Yuming's hair was frosted at this moment, and his limbs were wrapped in heavy ice. He staggered and fell to the ground. At this moment, he had consumed too much energy and could not sustain any extra strength to fight. On the other hand, Luo Ziyuan took advantage of the smoke to launch a fierce attack on the wild bear. But the wild bear was also smart. He used the iron chain to form an absolute defense in front of him, and ordinary people could not get close to him at all. Luo Ziyuan was panting in his chest, and the arc flashing on the lightsaber flickered. It was obvious that he could not hold on for long. The situation of the lone wolf was even more miserable. He was already poisoned by the poison on the sickle weasel's blade. The sickle weasel gathered a large number of combat troops to launch a siege against the lone wolf. The lone wolf, covered with scars, stood there with blurred vision, and several large holes on his chest kept bleeding. The entire encirclement of the rebels was shrinking inch by inch. The entire rebel army was in deep despair at this moment. On the high-rise buildings in the distance, Mu Qiu, who had watched a good show, slowly stood up. Holding the Shura mask stained with the evil spirit in his hand, he stretched lazily. Looking at the deepening night, Mu Qiu joked. "The movie is over, it's almost my turn to appear. Kamen Rider, come on stage." Then, under Lukinkin's slightly frightened gaze, he put on the soul-sucking Shura mask. In an instant, a gloomy dark evil spirit emanated from the mask. Lu Qianqian wondered if she was dazzled. After Mu Qiu put on the mask, his originally white shirt seemed to be stained with black. At this moment, Lu Qianqian seemed to see the wild and domineering eternal night Shura again. On the rooftop, Mu Qiu, shrouded in the lingering black blood, stood with his hands behind his back. Looking at the night sky in the distance, he slowly said, "Your illusion has improved a lot recently. Now, I'll give you a task. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord." Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 295. Under the silent night sky, the entire Zilan base seemed to blend into the night. However, the biochemical factory located in the central area was filled with flames and explosions. The rebels' long-planned raid plan fell into the enemy's trap. 3 Fenglin Knights, who are also among the strongest in the S level and are armed with box weapons, coupled with the joint encirclement and suppression by countless combat robots and combat troops, it has caused the resistance army to fall into a trend of continuous defeat. The vast majority of the rebels were not seriously injured in the mecha's fire, and their limbs were separated. He was involved in the aftermath of the Fenglin Knights battle, and no bones were left. At this moment, a deafening roar like a beast suddenly came from the battlefield. Mao Yuming, who had turned into a monster, was covered in cuts and bruises, and his hair was stained with scarlet blood. An antler on the top of the head was broken, and the limbs were frozen by frost, but there was still a wave of heat rising from the body. With a loud bang, the giant monster exuding huge power crashed to the ground. The blood energy rose, and the huge monster's body began to gradually shrink at a speed visible to the naked eye. In just a few moments, the four-faced monster that destroyed a large area of mechas once again transformed into a half-grown boy. The monster's physical features have all disappeared, only a pair of thick arms still show scales and hair-covered claws. With the disappearance of the huge monster, the gray mist that filled the entire biochemical factory also completely disappeared. Until then, the remaining rebels gathered together. The searchlights above their heads shone brightly, and the resistance fighters clenched their weapons with a look of determination on their faces. The ground ahead was shaking, and an army of combat robots and mechas was coming. They are already planning to fight to the death. Yuming. Seeing Mao Yuming falling to the ground, Luo Ziyuan turned around and exclaimed. However, at this moment, a cold wind carrying icy murderous intent roared from behind. Luo Ziyuan was shocked, and quickly turned around and waved his thunder sword to resist. The iron ball like a meteorite came across with the force of breaking through the air. The thunder sword collided with the iron ball, and crack like arcs of electricity filled the air. The unsuspecting Luo Ziyuan was immediately knocked away by the huge momentum. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Luo Ziyuan glanced at Mao Yuming, who fell to the ground in the distance, covered with bruises. Superpowers surge around the body, and gravity is controlled. He forcibly controlled his body to drift in the direction of his fellow rebels. Luo Ziyuan supported his loaded body and came to a group of fellow rebels. The arc on the thunder sword flickered and appeared, and Luo Ziyuan gritted his teeth. He is really a rat in the gutter, and his ghost is still there. The bald man who turned into a giant bear in the distance waved an iron chain and took back the huge iron ball. All combat troops listen to my orders and kill these rats who don't know how to live or die. However, at this moment, there was a sudden explosion on the other side of the biochemical factory. Urgent sirens echoed wildly around the factory walls. The searchlights on the roof of the building all converge in one direction. Alert, alert, there is a surprise attack by unknown combat forces. A danger warning sounded from the radio in the factory building. Immediately afterwards, there was another roar of explosions surrounding the factory. Countless tall robots exploded and destroyed for unknown reasons. Gray-white smoke spread along the aftermath of the explosion. The smell of gunpowder smoke and the crimson firelight instantly attracted the attention of everyone present. The Kama-Ita came galloping from a distance and controlled the tall body of the mecha to stop next to the bear. Hank, wearing close-fitting armor, stood in the sky, hovering above the wild bear and sickle. At this point, the three knights of Fenglan gathered together. Reinforcements from the rebels. The bear was thoughtful, his majestic body straightened up, and he glanced in a certain direction. At this moment, successive explosions caused all the mechas to gather towards the outside of the factory. Monitoring equipment installed throughout the factory also shifted the scene to the source of the explosion. The smoke dissipated, and a figure slowly walked out of the dense fog of the explosion. In the command room of the terminal building, all the control personnel focused their attention on the screen. Captain, is, a person. When everyone saw the being walking out of the smoke, they all looked horrified. Just one person. And all the combat troops and resistance fighters in the biochemical factory were staring directly at the figure stepping out of the smoke. This figure was seen wearing a close-fitting trousers and shirt, and his slender figure was exposed by the cold wind. The shirt that seemed to be white was stained by the lingering black air. There was a blood-red purple box hanging on his chest. There are still faint traces of blood lingering around the box. But this figure is wearing a dark and ferocious demon mask on his head. Somehow, the moment I saw the ghost mask, everyone's hearts trembled involuntarily. Are you an accomplice of the rebels? Destroy him first. Following an order, countless robots shot out devastating lasers. The combat troops also controlled the mechas to shoot out the cannonballs. In an instant, a large number of laser missiles rained down from the sky like rain. The destructive offensives were all directed at the black and white figure. The three Fenglin knights stared at the figure that was about to be destroyed by the artillery fire. They understood that the one who dared to appear at this time must not be a simple character. So they ordered their men to act decisively and kill him directly. However, a scene that surprised everyone appeared. These artillery lasers had not yet touched the masked man. A blood-colored barrier suddenly unfolded in the sky. The artillery fire from all over the sky hit the barrier, but there was not even a crack on the barrier. The sound of the artillery roared in everyone's ears, but everyone's eyes showed shock. Tisk, is it the awakener of telekinesis defense? The sickle weasel snorted secretly. They didn't expect the person to be so difficult. The heat wave of the explosion rippled and blew over the slender and tall figure of the mysterious figure. Judging from his body shape, it should be a man. Then, the man wearing a demon mask said. Masquerade, I wonder if I can attend. Under the light of the explosion, the ferocious look on the demon mask became more profound. But the tone under the mask was extremely easygoing, and there was a hint of contempt. Is it Chiu Mu? Luo Ziyuan gripped the hilt of the sword, and relying on the box of the monster on Mu Chiu's chest, he recognized the identity of the person. He suddenly remembered the scene of Mu Chiu holding the demon sword Yan Mo and killing people in Daowen Mountain Village. If it was him, maybe he could really lead the resistance army to break through the siege. Tisk, let me meet him when you pretend like this. The purple light flashed on the sickle weasel mecha, and the next second the figure had already rushed out. In just a few breaths, the sickle weasel had teleported to within a few feet of Mu Chiu in the mecha. Go to hell. The poisonous mechanical double blades hit the blood-colored barrier. As expected, the sickle weasel felt the barrier. Break it for me. The sickle weasel in the cockpit had a ferocious look on his face, and his brows were locked together. He maximized the kinetic energy of the mecha, and at the same time added his own supernatural power to the mechanical double blades. In an instant, the barrier that was difficult to break through by countless artillery fire actually showed tiny cracks. A sly smile appeared in the sickle weasel's eyes, and he licked his scarlet tongue. He jumped up while controlling the mecha, and was about to swing the two giant blades to chop at Mu Chiu. Het. Facing the shadow swung by the tall mecha, Mu Chiu under the mask also smiled. In the command room of the terminal brain building, everyone couldn't help but show horror in their eyes when they saw the picture on the screen. The masked man with black hair all over his body, the dark purple box hanging on his chest floated up. The masked man slowly stretched out his arm, placed his palm on the box and opened it. Instantly, the closed box opened. Accompanied by a cold and chilly breath, countless wailing and bloody souls rushed out of the box. Immediately, the bloody souls in the sky condensed into a scarlet blood light. The blood light turned into a stream of light and flashed into the masked man's hand. Gradually, a strange blood-red sword slowly emerged from the masked man's hand. The demon sword Yan Mo. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 296. Go to hell. The murderous intent in the eyes of Kama Itaki was so strong that he was controlling the mecha and was about to take off the masked man's head. Suddenly, a sound of metal clashing resounded in the empty night sky. What is this? The expression on Kama Itaki's face froze. I saw that a blood-red strange sword appeared in the hands of the masked man at some point. The blade flashed blood red, and the masked man raised the sword and just blocked his two giant blades. Itake's face was distorted, and he was controlling the mecha to forcibly cut off the mechanical giant blade. However, the masked man raised the sword seemingly lightly. Even if Itake used all his strength, he couldn't suppress the giant blade. Even his indestructible Itake double blades couldn't cut off the sword in the masked man's hand. Is it a power-type awakener? The cold bird and the wild bear in the distance saw the unparalleled strange power of the masked man. Dare not underestimate this mysterious man wearing a demon mask. The two looked at each other. Let's go together and get rid of him first. Then, Man Xiong and Han Ke also attacked in the direction of the masked man. Luo Ziyuan, who was far away, saw Mu Qiu being besieged by 3 Fenglan knights, and his face became anxious. Mu Qiu did kill 3 S-level alien envoys in Daowen Mountain Village. But those 3 were already injured before fighting with Mu Qiu. Moreover, as S-level strongmen, those ordinary S-level envoys can't compare with the well-equipped Fenglan knights. With a thought, Luo Ziyuan knew that he couldn't sit and wait for death at this moment. He turned and shouted to his fellow rebels behind him. "Everyone, follow me, and rush out." With the horn of the rebels breakout, a man-machine war started again. And in the command room of the terminal brain building 1,000 meters away, the long-haired man with brown hair no longer focused on the rebels. Instead, he focused his eyes on the knife-wielding figure wearing a demon mask on the screen. The mysterious masked man was seen holding a blood-colored demon sword and fighting with 3 Fenglan knights. The mecha controlled by the sickle weasel was swift, and the huge mecha almost flashed a residual image in the air. The purple blade attacked from all directions, and there were large pieces of blue ice feathers shooting out in the air. The masked man was motionless. Holding the demon sword, the blood-like flowing lines on the blade were still clearly visible. Immediately, the masked man turned his wrist, and the blood blade slowly turned in front of him. A void formation with blood-colored lines appeared. The blood-colored formation pattern coiled and rolled, and it looked like a blood-red door from a distance. Rash omen. Suddenly, the sound of wailing ghosts came from the blood gate. Countless blood souls emerged from the blood-colored formation pattern and swooped in all directions. These illusory blood souls seemed to materialize when they came into contact with the mechas. The blood souls screamed shrilly and pulled at the steel bodies of the surrounding mechas. What was even more terrifying was that during the tearing process of the dead souls, the surface of these mechas reinforced with special metals actually showed signs of corrosion and rust. And the ice feathers that shot out from the sky were all blocked by the blood-red array pattern. At this moment, the figure of the masked man suddenly flashed. The next second, the masked man had already flashed in front of the sickle weasel mecha entangled by the blood souls with a blood blade in his hand. The demon mask surrounded by black air and blood light was in front of him. The man in the cockpit had no time to be shocked, and hurriedly controlled the mecha to raise his arms to block. The blood-flashing demon sword collided with the mechanical double blades again. This time, the sickle weasel only felt a huge force coming from the demon sword. In an instant, a shattering sound came from the giant blade. Itake's eyes trembled, and his proud mechanical double swords actually showed clear cracks at this moment. At this moment, several tall humanoid mechas holding guns suddenly rushed around the masked man. With the roar of artillery fire behind him, the masked man turned around and swung his sword. The shells attacking the masked man were cut in half by the sharp demon sword in an instant. Then, the masked man's body turned into a beam of blood light, and the sound of ghosts crying was faintly heard in the air. The next moment, several attacking mechas were directly pierced by the demon sword and exploded. The eyes of the cold sparrow flying in the sky flashed with horror, and the transparent wings flapped to escape. At this moment, the masked man jumped directly into the air, and he had flashed in front of the cold sparrow in the black air. Han Q's eyeballs trembled, and he was about to release the cold air to resist, but he heard a calm comment from under the mask. "The cold air is not yet ready." The masked man swung the blood blade, and a blood light broke through the air. The mechanical wings behind Hankyu's close-fitting armor were directly cut off by the demon sword. The next moment, there was a sharp pain in the abdomen, and Hankei was kicked directly to the ground. The masked man had just stood on his feet, but a gust of wind suddenly whistled behind him. I saw a huge iron ball that was like a meteorite, dragging a thick iron chain behind it, pressing across the sky with the force of Mount Tai. The iron ball was covered with sharp spikes, and the spikes suddenly bulged during the continuous rotation, instantly turning into a killing weapon. With a loud bang, the masked man was instantly blasted to the ground by the iron ball with supernatural powers. In an instant, the ground was blasted into a deep pit by the heavy iron ball, and smoke and dust rose everywhere. It's done. In the distance, the barbarian bear waved the chain with a grim smile on his face. No creature hit by his spiral meteorite could survive. However, when the smoke gradually dissipated, the barbarian bear's grim smile was completely on his face. A figure could be vaguely seen standing in the collapsed pit. And this figure wore a demon mask, and a black aura lingered around him. Blood-like lines could be seen flowing on the demon sword in his hand. It was still the figure of the masked man. But this time, the masked man was wearing a set of domineering armor that was completely black and glowing. The armor was inlaid with dragon teeth and claws, and it also exuded a terrifying aura that made people palpitate. If someone had passed the last level of the ominous abyss, they would be surprised to notice the armor the masked man was wearing at this moment. It was the destructive equipment after defeating the final boss, the Abyss Dragon. Dragon armor. Then, they heard a brisk laugh from under the mask. The warm-up time is over, you can leave now. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 297. As the dust dispersed, a huge deep crater was created by the spiral meteorite. Amidst the entanglement of black and blood-red horses, a figure slowly emerged. That is. The smoke filled the air, and I saw the figure standing upright in the pit. He still had that hideous and terrifying demon mask, and he was holding that strange long knife that was shining with blood. But the difference from before is that the masked man now has a set of dark black domineering armor. This armor covers the whole body and looks thick and solid. The flickering light above looks like pitch black scales. And on the chest of the masked man, black energy continued to flow out of a dark purple box. As all the black energy poured into the armor, the domineering armor gradually became solid from a shadow. What's even more terrifying is that under the strong attack of the wild bear, the masked man seemed to be unscathed. Is that a weapon box? In the distance, the three knights of Fenglan stared blankly at the terrifying figure in the pit. Feel the terrifying aura spreading from the dark armor. Even the well-informed Fenglan knight couldn't help but feel his breath stagnate. This aura is already more terrifying than the box weapons they are wearing. You must know that the box weapons they use are the essence of Zilan Base's technology. And the armor on the masked man in front of him has surpassed the box weapons of these knights in terms of momentum alone. There was also that demonic sword that shone with blood, and its power was far beyond their imagination. Even a sacred object of destruction-level weapons is nothing more than that, right? How is it possible? How can the Resistance Army make a box weapon of this level? At this moment, not only the Zilan combat troops on the scene were shocked. Even the control personnel in the combat command room in the central area were stunned. Only the man wearing a leather trench coat and long brown hair seemed to remember something. Staring at the purple box suspended in front of the masked man in the picture, his eyes trembled. After a while, the long-haired man couldn't hide the horror in his eyes. He said word by word from the corner of his mouth. The box of monsters. In the battlefield, everyone was shocked by the powerful power of the masked man. The battlefield fell into a brief silence for a moment. Asshole, I don't believe that so many people can't defeat him together. Kama Itaki, who was driving a purple mecha, had an angry look on his face. He suddenly leaned forward, and all the power mixed with supernatural powers was poured into the mecha. In an instant, the giant mechanical blade that had just been cut off by the demon sword began to condense again. Then, the purple mecha figure suddenly moved. It was like a beam of purple electric light rushing towards the direction of the masked man. Kama Itaki! The barbarian bear roared, and when he saw Kama Ita take action, he immediately threw the iron chain meteorite in his hand. In just a few breaths, the poisonous mechanical giant blade had arrived in front of the masked man. The sky was shrouded in cold air, and a hurricane fell from the sky with a biting chill. The wind roared from the side, and the shadow of a huge meteorite struck with endless murderous intent. At the same time, artillery fire rang out from behind, and a combat force drove a combat mecha to attack and kill. In an instant, the masked man was surrounded on all sides. Noisy, fierce murderous intent came from all directions. But all he saw was the tall and straight figure of the masked man. The magic dragon armor is still releasing endless pressure outwards. The moment the Kamamita mecha controlled the mechanical double blades and slashed down, the chest of the demon dragon armor suddenly lit up with two red rays of light. It was as if the evil dragon opened its eyes. Roar! A heart-shaking roar came from around the masked man. The earth collapsed, the airflow stagnated, and a huge and ferocious dragon appeared in the sky above the mysterious figure wearing a devil mask. Along with the fierce roar of the evil dragon, all the surrounding offensives were shaken away by the spreading black energy. Kama Itaki controlled the purple mecha and was the first to feel the terrifying power emanating from the evil dragon. His expression was shaken, and he subconsciously wanted to run away, but he was still blown away in an instant. After rolling to the ground repeatedly, there were already signs of fragmentation on the Kama Ita mecha. The meteorite iron balls that bombarded were directly bounced far away, destroying and smashing a row of combat robots. Before the invading cold air could subside, it was shattered into a piece of powder by the shocking waves of the demonic dragon. The large mechas behind him exploded one after another, and the sound of bombing continued. The armor of the demonic dragon is so terrifying. At this moment, under the gaze of everyone, the masked man wearing the magic dragon armor moved again. I saw him slowly raising the demon sword in his hand and standing it in front of him. The voice under the mask was low, like the whisper of a devil. Haunted by evil spirits. Accompanied by a beam of bloody light reaching into the sky. In an instant, the bloody ghosts flying all over the sky seemed to be inspired by something. Countless ghosts and ghosts floated in the direction of the demon sword from deep underground and in the long night sky. All the blood souls in the sky merged into the armor and the demon sword. The moment the blood soul was injected into it, the long and narrow demon knife turned blood red. The blood on the blade seemed to come alive, and the blade was stretched several times out of thin air. In an instant, the demon sword in the masked man's hand had turned into a scarlet blade several feet long. Looking at the increasingly colorful demon sword in his hand, Mewtwo under the mask shook his head secretly. Sure enough, only in the game world can the demon sword strengthen itself by absorbing weapons and equipment. In the virtual world, including weapons and equipment, everything is composed of soul energy. These are simply a great tonic for the Wooling Box and the demon sword Yan Mo, who have been promoted by devouring souls and blood. In reality, the demon sword cannot devour mecha weapons like these. Looking at the army composed of countless mechas in front of him, Mewtwo slowly waved his wrist holding the sword. As the handle of the sword turned, the scarlet color on the several-foot-long blade became more and more intense. The next moment, the scarlet blade turned into a gorgeous wave. The blood-colored sword energy filled with the cry of ghosts and ghosts spread like ripples. In an instant, the entire battlefield seemed to turn black and white. Time stopped. Then, blood flowed, and all the mecha humans who came into contact with the blood-colored sword energy were cut into two pieces. The roar of the mecha explosion sounded in everyone's ears, deafening. but everyone just stared blankly at the masked man holding the crimson blood blade standing in the distance. What's going on? The figure of Kama Itaki escaped in a panic like a rolling gourd. His mecha was completely shattered by the powerful sword energy of the crimson blood blade, and turned into a beam of purple light and returned to the box. Staring at the crimson blood blade several feet long in the masked man's hand, his expression was terrified. Even a destructive level holy relic is no more than this, right? At this moment, Kama Itaki was surprised to find that the masked man wearing dragon armor was slowly walking towards him. Go! Suddenly, a heavy whistling sound of a gust of wind came from the air. The wild bear in the distance threw the meteorite iron ball and smashed it at the masked man. Oh! Mewtwo's face was calm under the mask. He simply stopped and swung the scarlet blood blade in his hand at the moment when the huge thorn ball hit him. In an instant, a strange scarlet sword energy wrapped with the sound of ghost crying broke through the air. The next moment, the iron ball that was so big that it could destroy a tall building and was like a meteorite was split in half by the sword energy in the blink of an eye. Not only that, the scarlet sword energy did not slow down after cutting off the meteorite. It broke through the air and chopped towards the wild bear at the end of the iron chain in the distance. The bloodlight in the pupils came from far to near, and the wild bear looked horrified. He had no time to dodge when he turned his body to the side, and he subconsciously raised his thick arm to block it. However, the next second, the scarlet blood blade directly penetrated his right arm and hit the tall building behind the wild bear. The thick bear paw was cut off by the bloody blade in an instant. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 298. A large amount of blood suddenly gushed out of his arm. The barbarian bear turned directly into a human form, his face was pale, and veins on his forehead bulged. The next second, the barbarian bear was surprised to find that it was as if he was bitten by something. The flesh and blood at the wound cut by the blood blade was still melting. There was horror in the barbarian bear's eyes. He immediately pulled out the short knife at his waist and cut off a part of his shoulder. Resisting the severe pain, the barbarian bear looked at the masked figure in the distance that released boundless power. His eyes were bloodshot. At this point, he had to admit that this mysterious masked man was so powerful. If they had to wait for reinforcements to arrive at this time, they would also die here. Go! The barbarian bear suddenly uttered this word, with an unwilling expression. He immediately crushed a spherical device in his hand. And the sickle weasel and winter sparrow on the side also took out the same spherical device and crushed it like the barbarian bear. In an instant, a vortex suddenly appeared above the three people, sucking them in directly. Then, the three vortices converged together and turned into a stream of light, rushing away into the distance. Oh! Is it the power of space? Mewtwo, who was under the mask, immediately felt the power of space contained in the vortex the moment it appeared. However, Mewtwo did not chase after it, and the corners of his mouth under the mask rose slightly. If someone familiar with Mewtwo saw this smile, they would definitely tremble in their hearts. Because every time Mewtwo showed this weird smile, it proved that someone was going to suffer. And just when the three Fenglin knights fled, the whole scene fell into a brief stillness. Good opportunity, take advantage of it to fight back against them now. Luo Ziyuan, who was far away, showed joy after seeing this scene. Turned around and led a group of remaining rebels to launch a fierce charge. At this point, the combat troops that had been wiped out by Mewtwo were suddenly caught in a bitter battle. Luo Ziyuan led his men to kill a group of peripheral combat robots, and came to the domineering figure wearing a demon mask and dragon armor. Chu, brother Chu. The masked man really shocked him too much. Now Luo Ziyuan was not sure whether the powerful figure in front of him was the Chu Mu he knew. At this moment, under the light of the war, the masked man slowly turned his head and looked at everyone. As the purple box on the masked man's chest opened, The scarlet blood blade and the dragon armor all turned into a beam of black and red light and poured into it. The mysterious figure slowly took off the hideous demon mask on his face, revealing a face familiar to everyone. "Why, are you surprised?" Mewtwo had a faint smile on his face. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he was completely different from the domineering figure just now. After seeing Mewtwo's handsome face, everyone finally felt relieved. Without time to say anything more, Luo Ziyuan looked at Mewtwo. "Brother Chu, the enemy's reinforcements will arrive soon, we have to retreat quickly." At this moment, a series of explosions came from the biochemical building in the distance. A grey figure rushed out from the aftermath of the explosion. Everyone looked and found that this figure was the lone wolf who turned into a werewolf. The lone wolf was also covered with wounds, but after being injected with drugs, he could barely maintain his physical strength for a while. A middle-aged man in a white coat was dragged behind the lone wolf. The middle-aged man's face was pale and he had obviously fainted. The moment he saw the middle-aged man, the lone wolf and Luo Ziyuan looked at each other and nodded. And Mewtwo looked at the unconscious middle-aged man, thinking. "Everyone evacuate quickly." Accompanied by an order, artillery fire roared and explosions broke out. The rebels quickly opened a gap outside the biochemical factory and evacuated under the cover of darkness. In the center of Zilan Base stands a towering building. This is the command fortress that decides all matters of Zilan Base, and it is also an absolute forbidden area for humans. The End Brain Building. At this moment, in a spacious combat command room in the End Brain Building, the three defeated and fleeing Fenglin Knights lowered their heads and stood there blankly. They knew what the failure of this operation meant. In front of the three people, there stood a young man wearing a leather windbreaker and long brown hair. Then, the scene was dead silent. The barbarian bear, who lost an arm, was the first to be unable to hold back and shouted, "Captain, this time we did not do a good job, and the three of us are willing to be punished." The other two were silent. They did not expect that such a terrifying existence as the masked man would appear in this operation. Whether it was the scarlet blood blade wrapped in ghosts, or the dragon armor with huge power. All of them felt trembling and palpitating from the bottom of their hearts. The three of them were ready to accept the punishment. However, this time, the long-haired man who had always been strict with them remained silent for a long time. After a few breaths, the long-haired man looked deep in the eyes, turned around and sighed. "How can you beat him? After all, he has a real holy object in his hand." After a while, the three people who learned the truth left with extremely shocked expressions. The expression on his face could no longer be described simply as horror. It turned out that what the masked man was holding was actually a legendary holy object. After the three people left, the long-haired man came to the console. I repeatedly observed the footage recorded in the surveillance of the biochemical factory. When the picture came to the mysterious man wearing a devil mask, the long-haired man stared intently at the purple box suspended on the masked man's chest. After a while, he contacted the intelligence personnel of the combat unit and said, "I want all the information on this mask, immediately." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 299. At the junction of the central area of Zilan Base and the civilian area, in the rebel headquarters in the underground passage, a middle-aged man in a white coat and an old face slowly opened his eyes. A trace of confusion flashed across his turbid eyes. He found himself sitting in an unknown laboratory. Then his pupils suddenly widened, and his eyes stared at the short figure on the round table in front of him. This short figure, which was only the size of an adult's palm, had purple skin and a slender body, like an alien monster. "Zhou Yi." The middle-aged man's eyes were extremely shocked, and his mouth opened and closed for a long time without saying a word. Professor Joe, who was wearing a white tights, sighed, and a strange baby voice came out of his mouth. "Long time no see, Lao Zhang." The middle-aged man called Lao Zhang realized that he was in a laboratory. He suddenly remembered that the biochemical factory where he was attacked by the rebels. After a fierce battle, the building of their biochemical base was broken into by the rebels. A large amount of experimental data was stolen by the rebels. And the last picture in his eyes was a giant claw stretched out by a werewolf monster. What are you going to do?" The old middle-aged man's eyes were full of horror, and he trembled all over when facing this dwarf who was only the size of his palm. In addition to the panic in his eyes, there seemed to be a trace of guilt. Seeing his old friend in such a miserable state, Professor Joe shook his head and looked at the middle-aged man with a deep gaze. "Among the old friends, you are the only one who is afraid of death and threw yourself into Duan Muchen's hands. At this point, I don't want to pursue anything. I just want to ask you one thing. Where is the key to apocalypse?" When Professor Joe mentioned the past, the middle-aged man called Lao Zhang could barely keep calm. Only a pair of pupils flashed with uneasiness. But when Professor Joe said the last sentence, the middle-aged man's face turned pale. I don't know." The middle-aged man's eyes dodged and his mind trembled. "Professor, let me do it." A low voice suddenly came from the side. But I saw a short-haired man with a sturdy figure and a deep scar at the corner of his eye slowly walking over. Lone Wolf. The lone wolf was rubbing his hands, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes when he looked at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man's old face showed a look of fear. "No, don't." Outside the laboratory, in the command room of the resistance headquarters, Luo Ziyuan, wrapped in bandages, sat on one side, and beside him were several other core members of the resistance. Luo Ziyuan looked at Mu Qiu in front of him with an apologetic look. "Brother Qiu, we checked all the databases of the biochemical factory and found no information about your cousin." Mu Qiu nodded slowly to show his understanding. The data of each biochemical factory in Zilan base is interoperable. This also indirectly shows that the cousin mentioned by Mu Qiu has not undergone human body modification. This is a good thing, but also a bad thing. The good thing means that Mu Qiu's cousin is free from cruel experimental modification. The bad thing is that the clues they can find are broken again. A scene next to him suddenly remembered something and asked, "Why is Sister Qian missing?" Mu Qiu narrowed his eyes slightly, stroking his chin and replied, "She was worried about her cousin's safety, so she went outside to find clues." Luo Ziyuan's face suddenly showed embarrassment. Before entering the base, in order to win over Mu Qiu and the others, he had promised to help the two find their cousin. But after so long, they didn't find any clues at all. Last night's action was all thanks to Mu Qiu's help. They were able to break through the siege and successfully complete the mission. If this continues, how can he keep them? From last night's battle, the shortcomings of the rebels were indeed seen. Although the rebels have a large number of people, most of them are ordinary people with average strength. The combat power of these people depends entirely on the box weapons in their hands. On the other hand, the Zilan base not only has well-equipped combat robots. Its combat troops are also powerful, and there are 8 Fenglan knights holding S-level box weapons. In this comparison, the strength of the rebels is indeed much weaker. This is also the main reason why Luo Ziyuan wants to absorb Mu Qiu and the others to join. Just when Luo Ziyuan was hesitant, the mechanical door of the command room suddenly rose, and the indifferent figure of the lone wolf slowly walked in from outside the door. The lone wolf looked strange, with a little blood on his body. He looked around at everyone in the command room, his eyes were sharp and his voice was low. "I found out." Everyone immediately focused their attention on the lone wolf, waiting for his answer. The lone wolf glanced at Mu Qiu, who smiled at him. The lone wolf sighed rarely. The key to the apocalypse is in the Divine Realm continent. What, the Divine Realm continent? That virtual game world? How is that possible? As soon as these words came out, all the core members of the resistance army present were shocked. Oh! Seeing the surprised expressions on everyone's faces, Mu Qiu was a little puzzled. What is the apocalypse key? Lone Wolf nodded solemnly. It has been tested by the polygraph expert at the headquarters, and this news should be true. Tianlai Novel Network once again confirmed the accuracy of the intelligence. Everyone's expressions still could not calm down for a long time. Is this to ask them to go to the virtual game world to get it? Seeing Mu Qiu's puzzled expression, Luo Ziyuan turned to explain. Brother Qiu, you also saw it last night. In addition to rescuing the companions who were captured, we also took away a scientist from the biochemical base. Mu Qiu nodded, and he naturally noticed the old middle-aged man. Luo Ziyuan sighed. This scientist is called Zhang Xinlai. He used to be a top researcher in the base's technology with Professor Zhou and others. Including the current Zilan base leader Duan Muqian, these top scientists who develop high technology have jointly developed the 3 sacred objects that protect the base. And Professor Zhang once jointly developed one of the destructive level sacred objects with Professor Zhou. This sacred object is called Apocalypse Mecha. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 300. Apocalypse Mecha. Mu Qiu pondered the name thoughtfully. As a powerful box weapon of destruction level, the Apocalypse Mecha was jointly manufactured by several top scientists. This Apocalypse Mecha will definitely not be weaker than the monster box in his hand. Luo Ziyuan nodded and said seriously. After the Apocalypse Mecha was successfully developed, in order to prevent interested people from using the mecha to satisfy their own selfish interests, Professor Zhou and Professor Zhang divided the mecha into 2 parts. The main body of the mecha is kept by Professor Zhou, while the key to activate the mecha is kept by Professor Zhang. Later, there was a big change in the base, and Duan Muqian and Professor Zhou completely broke up. Duan Muqian united with the heterogeneous religion to kill a large number of scientists who were unwilling to obey. Professor Zhou escaped under our protection. But Professor Zhang took advantage of this and took the key to the apocalypse to join Duan Muqian's army. Mu Qiu smiled. So the main purpose of your operation this time is Professor Zhang? No, to be precise, it should be the apocalypse key in Professor Zhang's hand, right? Luo Ziyuan looked embarrassed, but did not refute. We guessed that Duan Muqian would not be able to store such an important thing in Professor Zhang's body. But we didn't expect that Zilan base would put the key to the apocalypse into the game world they developed personally. Mu Qiu rubbed her chin and smiled. This is most likely a trap. As soon as the statement came out, the entire audience fell into silence. How could they not guess that this was probably a trap set by Zilan base? But now they know the situation inside the resistance all too well. With only a limited number of awakened people and those determined survivors, it is impossible to shake the status of Zilan base. Now if they want to make a comeback from a desperate situation, their only hope is to rely on a sacred object with destructive power. So this key that can activate the apocalypse mecha is bound to be obtained by the resistance. After a not so intense discussion, everyone's opinions were quite unanimous, that is, try your best to get the key to the apocalypse. The top brass of the resistance gathered together. A prototype of a plan to obtain the key to the apocalypse was quickly discussed. At this time, Luo Ziyuan seemed to have thought of something. He quickly looked at Mu Qiu. Brother Qiu, if there is no clue about your cousin yet, I think I might be able to give you some help in the game world. Mao Yuming on the side also said with bright eyes. Yes, Brother Qiu, more than half of the humans in Zilan base are immersed in the divine continent. Maybe you can get some clues in the game world. In fact, Luo Ziyuan's purpose in saying this was to win over Mu Qiu. The power of the monster box was seen by him last night. After being blessed with the demon box, Mu Qiu was so powerful that she could resist 3 Fenglan Knights. This made Luo Ziyuan sigh and at the same time become more determined to win over Mu Qiu. That's right, the resistance forces still think that the reason why Mu Qiu is so powerful. All because he holds the demon box, one of the 3 holy objects. Mao Yuming then said excitedly. I know that after defeating the boss on one level, you will get a server-wide notification device. I believe this prop can definitely help Brother Qiu. Mu Qiu looked at the expectant eyes of everyone and immediately understood their intentions. He smiled and nodded. In that case, it would be great to have a direction. In fact, Mu Qiu's search for a cousin from beginning to end was just an excuse to spy on information. He has determined the general location of Shueqianya, and it is no surprise that he is in the terminal building. But what Mu Qiu is really interested in the so-called virtual world is the sacred object called the Apocalypse Mecha. If the resistance army can fight with the Zilan base and both sides suffer losses, then Mu Qiu can just reap the benefits. This is Mu Qiu's true purpose. Looking at the people who were still seriously discussing their plans, Mu Qiu had a meaningful smile on her lips. Besides, if we talk about that game world, it seems to be his home field. At the same time, in the terminal building located in the central area of Zilan base, a man wearing a leather jacket and long brown hair walked quickly through the bright passage with a solemn expression. From time to time, a member of the combat force wearing uniform appeared around. When these people saw the long-haired man, they all looked panicked and hurriedly saluted. But the long-haired man didn't even look at these men. Holding the folder, he walked straight into the elevator shaft deep in the passage. The elevator went up and finally reached the top of the entire fortress-like building. At the top of the terminal building is an extremely large and spacious laboratory, brightly lit everywhere. Except for the faint sound of some mechanical operation, it was silent. With the arrival of the long-haired man, the mechanical door in front of the laboratory opened automatically. The long-haired man quickly walked into the laboratory, past many strange instruments, and came to an extremely tall culture container. Several thick pipes extract a bright green liquid, and all of it flows into the culture instrument in the center. In the central test tube, a brain was inserted into a dozen electrical wires and rested in a bright green nutrient solution. The long-haired man bowed slightly and said directly, "It has been confirmed that the box weapon held by the masked man who attacked the biochemical factory last night is the long-lost monster box from the base." After saying that, the entire laboratory fell into a long silence. After a while, a low electronic sound like a mechanical synthesis came from all directions in the entire space. After all this time, he still hasn't given up. The long-haired man continued to speak. As for the identity of the masked man, I saw 2 photos flying out of the folder in the man's hand. As the 2 photos float side by side, one of the photos is of the mysterious masked man who attacked the biochemical factory last night and held the box of monsters. Another photo also shows a figure wearing a mask. However, this mask is actually the image of a demon with a red face and fangs, which makes people shudder just by looking at it. If it were at the previous Yuhei base, this demonic mask with a red face and fangs would definitely make people remember it freshly. Because the owner of this mask is exactly the nightmare in the hearts of countless survivors of the Jade Sea. Eternal Night Shura. Except for the color and details, the 2 masks are very similar in style and features. In addition, no clues about this masked man have been found from the database. Although we are still difficult to determine the specific identity of the visitor. But we have reason to suspect that the masked man who raided the biochemical factory last night came from Eternal Night Dynasty. As the long-haired man finished speaking, mechanical electronic sounds echoed around him again. Are you still here? The Eternal Night Dynasty. Judging from the current situation, The organization that replaced the Yuhei base is likely to have infiltrated into the base and reached some kind of cooperation with the rebels. Zhang Xinlai has been taken away by the rebels. Presumably the news has also reached the ears of the rebels. If we want to completely eliminate those difficult resistance forces, our plan must be implemented as soon as possible. The long-haired man suddenly raised his head and looked at the human brain in the test tube, his eyes sharp and firm. Father,